I'm reading tonight from the book of Ruth. I've preached from Ruth before, but I want to look at some of these things again, trusting we'll get something new out of it. I shall begin reading with the first verse, the first chapter in the book of Ruth. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, and there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab, and the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters, why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, and go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes, and the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go. Whither thou lodgest, I will lodge, and thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. And the Lord do so to me and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left, speaking unto her. And they 2 went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them. And they said, Is this Naomi? And she said unto them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt bitterly, very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his precious word. I'm trusting God will help us tonight as we look at this book of Ruth. There are some very important truths in it which I think affect us today. Notice there was famine in the land, and they made a choice on their own to go down into country of Moab because it was more prosperous down there. There was a famine in the land where they were, but Moab seemed to have food and that, so they just decided to go on down there. And it's very easy to make wrong decisions when things get rough. Her husband and sons both died. Now her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah, it says returned. And that was, she returned when Naomi could promise her nothing. I want you to notice Naomi said to her, Now look, I don't have any more sons. I don't have anything to offer you. And why not go back to your country where you can find a husband and there live, and back to your own home and your own people and your own gods? And I can't offer you nothing. My God has not treated me good. I don't have any sons. I don't have any money. I don't have anything. And on that respect, Orpah turned back and went back. But Ruth stayed with her mother-in-law. Now I want you to notice that with no promise of anything whatsoever, she chose to stay with Naomi. Your God shall be my God, your people my people, and your country my country. Now, I'll tell you, it's something to walk away from your own country. The things from your own country are very dear to people. I noticed on TV just the other day when some Jewish people came from Russia to Israel. And they came because things were getting hard in Russia. But it's interesting to me that this one lady said, well, although we're in Israel, and I know it's God's country, and the country belongs to the Jews, but still, she said, I'm a Russian. Russia was so dear to her. She longed for the language. They stayed in a little group of people that still spoke Russian. And she couldn't break away from the fact that here's her own country. Now, Ruth is walking away from her own country, I want you to notice. And it says Orpah turned back. And I want you to notice she turned back at the point of not having a husband. She turned back at the prospect that nothing was offered to her. Now, I want you to get this, and I trust it's important if you don't get anything else tonight. And someone said this, and I don't know who it was. I can't remember. Someone said at the moment that she turned back, she stepped out of divine history. And nothing was ever heard of her again. Now, that didn't mean she didn't turn back to a good life. She may have found a husband. She may have found a wealthy man. She may have had a good life and lived a long life and been prosperous and happy and well and died in ripe old age, living a wonderful life. But she had stepped out of divine history so that all that happened to her from the time she left Ruth, from the time she left Naomi, all that happened to her was worth nothing. Oh, I hope we get all this. She stepped out of divine history, and the only thing that amounts to anything in this world is the history that God's making. That's the only history. You can read it. If you're a student of history, you can study the history of nations, the rise and fall of different empires. They all rose to a certain height, then fell, but God's kingdom has never fallen and never will. So the important thing is to get with something that's never going to fall. So at the moment she went back, she stepped out of divine history and was never heard of again. Now, as I said, the only thing that's going to count at the judgment bar of God is what happened in divine history. What did it profit her? What did it profit Orpah if she gained so much but was out of divine history? Now, I want you to know, dear ones, that our history is being recorded today just as much as theirs was. We can read the Bible and think, these are wonderful stories. I want you to know ours is being written just as much. And God's history is being written today just as much as it was then. And the only thing that counts today is what God's history is writing. The only thing that will count at the judgment bar of God is whether or not our lives have been part of divine history. Oh, I trust you're getting this. You may personally feel that you can't do much and don't do much, but I want you to know that if you're helping support God's men and God's people by prayer and attendance and support, I want you to know you're a part of God's history. You are a part of divine history if you're supporting what God's doing. Orpah turned back over a husband. Nothing wrong in that, of having a husband. But she stepped out of divine history to get him. There are many things that cause people to step out of divine history, and one of them is the uncertainty of the future. The future is uncertain, and we make choices instead of with God's history. We make choices of what will benefit us and profit us and give security for the future. And many people step out of divine history to go with what they call a certainty of the future. I want you to know there is no certainty of the future. And we would do well to know that. I think of something that happened even in my own life years ago when I was evangelistic work. And I think I've mentioned this before. We just had just a little cottage there in a campground I stayed with in the summer. You drove a second-hand car, and one woman remarked to Vera Wagner, said, "The poor Morgans, they don't have anything." And she spoke up and she said, "Oh, don't feel sorry for the Morgans. They're the richest people I know." I'm thankful for that. I think of when I married Barbara. She had a good job, 25 years in Celanese, had good income. She had good security, a good pension, good everything for the future. And when the Lord witnessed for her to marry me, I could offer her nothing. Nothing concerning future security, no security. And how many people make decisions on the basis of security? That was one of the things I wondered about. Would she leave the security of that job and what she has to come with me when I can offer her nothing? Young people today, thank God she did. She wouldn't be here tonight if she didn't. So she left her job, left the security, and to come and live with me. He certainly has, honey. And the devil is such a liar because he told me when I was younger, he said, "You're going to die in the poorhouse." Young people today on jobs want security, want hospitalization, they want pension. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just simply saying that this is so in our systems that many times we follow the kingdom of God in the same pattern. We want security. If we can't get security, we won't follow it. Jesus told the parable about the man who wanted security and said, "I'll tear down my barns and build greater barns." And that's what he did. And then he said, "So eat, drink, and be merry, for thou hast much good laid up for many years." But God said, "Thou fool, this night shall thy soul be required of thee." A fool for putting all of his hopes in tomorrow's security. I'm not against security. Don't misunderstand me. If God provides it, wonderful. But if you have to step out of the divine history to do it, you have made a great mistake. I'm not against security. But if you have to step out of divine history to get it, you're making a tragic mistake. So the Bible said concerning that, so is he that layeth not up treasure for himself. The turning back is not this. Notice this of Orpah, it was not over sinful things. And this is where many people step out of divine history. They feel like as long as I'm not sinning, it's all right what I do. I want you to know it's important to stick with Jesus and divine history for it to count at the judgment day. You may not do anything wrong. From this moment on, not do one thing wrong, say one thing wrong. But if you step out of divine history, all that you're doing from here until you die will count for nothing at the judgment bar of God. As though you had been a sinner, a deep sinner out in a tavern and wasted your life. Your life is just as much wasted if you step out of divine history. That was the beautiful thing about the story of Abraham. It said he went out not knowing where he was going. He was moving with divine history. I'm so glad God's not a legalist. My, oh my. If he were, this dear girl, Ruth, would never have been written about in God's Word. She was a Moabitess. And the children of Israel were not to marry anyone. I want to turn and read in Nehemiah, the 13th chapter. It said on that day, the 13th chapter, the first verse of Nehemiah, said on that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonites and Moabites should not come into the congregation of God forever. A Moabite was never, they were not to marry a Moabite person, and they were not allowed to come to the congregation. It says forever, but God turned around and took her and put her in the lineage of Christ. He changed his mind and went back on his own law. I want you to see what God will do if he'll find somebody that will really go after him. He'll change his own law. Oh, I'm so glad God's not a legalist. He saw a young woman down there that asked for nothing and made him her God, and I tell you, changed his own law. I was writing down some notes here, and I was up a little road, and I said, glory. For such a God. What a beautiful picture of devotion. She was such a rare person. Where you go, I'll go. Where you lodge, I'll lodge. Thy people shall be my people. Thy God shall be my God. Where you die, I'll die. Where you're buried, I'll be buried. What devotion when she was promised nothing. She asked for nothing but got everything. Oh, I wish we could see the truth in that. She wasn't promised a husband. She was poor. Naomi was poor. They were going back. She was going back to poverty for no husband. She was promised nothing, just for the privilege to stick with Naomi until she died. But I want to tell you, she found a husband. God gave her a husband. He gave her a family. He gave her wealth. And she was put in the lineage of Christ. I don't know how you can get any higher than that. She became the great-grandmother of David, the king of Israel. Because God went against his own law. Because he found a woman with such devotion in her. And God said, I'll bring her into the kingdom of God. And she married Boaz, a kinsman redeemer. You remember reading the story. And this gave Naomi back her inheritance. Such a woman. And the first baby boy that was born to Ruth, she went over and put it in the arms of Naomi. Imagine, she gave the child away for Naomi's inheritance. And it was even said so here in the last part. It says, the women of the neighborhood gave it a name, saying, there shall be a son born to Naomi, and they called it Obed, the father of Jesse. In other words, they said the son is born to Naomi. It said Naomi got the son. Ruth had the son. But it gave her, Naomi, an inheritance in the things of God. Now here's something, dear ones, I trust we can get a hold of. Naomi got a son, got her inheritance back. She came back from the Moabite country, and she said to the people, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara, for God has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, and I've come back empty, and God has dealt bitterly with me. I want you to know she was an old woman before she knew that God had been with her all through these years. What a tragedy to live, to be an old woman before you know God's been with you. What a tragedy for people to go through trials, difficulty, and think God's left them, when all the time, if you're doing your best to serve God, I want you to know God's with you in your problems, difficulties, and trial. And by faith will say, I don't know what's happening, but God's with me. I know that. But she said, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara. Lord's bell. God was with her. He was watching over every step this woman took. He was with her and helping her. And finally, as an old woman, she begins to realize, well, God was with me all along. What a tragedy for us to live and think that God's forgotten you. I want you to know, if any of you tonight think God has forgotten you, that is of the devil. God never forgets one of his own. And he wants us to walk in divine history. If you keep walking with God, you're moving with divine history, and God's hand is upon you. Naomi thought God had forsaken her. True faith will know that God has never forsaken us. What a tragedy, I said, to live such a life and not realize it until you're old. So, today, dear ones, we're moving with divine history. And I am as sure as I'm standing in this pulpit that Brother Helm's ministry is moving with divine history today. Oh, I wish we could get a hold of that. Brother Ham's ministry is moving with divine history. And for us to move with him, to pray with him, support him, we're part of divine history today, and that's the only thing that will count at the judgment bar of God. You turn back for security reasons and other thing else. Dear ones, I want you to know that we're moving out of divine history. There'll be nothing that will count at the judgment. But I'm positive as we stand here tonight that you stick with Brother Helm and Brother Oliver, who is up there in Parker City praying. You stay with these men. They're moving with divine history. And God has called us to move with divine history. It's the only thing that's going to count. Nothing else will count. And the devil will come to you for various reasons, for one reason or another, to step out of divine history. But I want you to know, dear ones, that God has called us to move with him. It may seem difficult to make the decision to do it, but in the end it's going to pay off. At the judgment bar of God, we'll be glad we stayed with divine history.